welcome to the Animal Training Academy Making Ripples podcast show, the show where we share the stories of the ripple-making extraordinaires with behavior nerd superpowers who make up the Animal Training Academy membership. I'm your host and one of the happiness engineers at Animal Training Academy, Shelley Wood from Drop Your Jaws Dog Training in Cape Girardeau, Missouri in the United States. We're absolutely thrilled and grateful to have you here with us today. Make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss a single episode. This show is brought to you on behalf of the Animal Training Academy membership. So if you like the conversations in these episodes, then we want to invite you to continue them with like-minded people in the ATA membership, which you can find out more about at www.atamember.com. Within the membership, you can get access to twice monthly live web classes, the back catalog of previous web class replays, plus a huge library of videos and projects to help you problem solve your training challenges. And we're a sociable bunch with an exclusive private Facebook group and forums area. It's like a Netflix social media platform for animal behavior geeks. I'm excited to welcome Sean Mulhall to the show today. Sean is the show coordinator at Moonlit Sanctuary, a conservation wildlife park 40 minutes out of Melbourne, Australia. Her role is coordinating the animal training and husbandry of the sanctuary's animal show cast that display their natural behaviors in Moonlit's Conservation in Action show. The show is used to tell the story of these Australian native creatures, helping the audience to build a meaningful connection to the natural world. Sean has the joy and privilege to work alongside a range of clever critter, such as a superstar Rufus Batong, a pack of talented dingoes, fluffy, daring squirrel gliders, and the funniest Major Mitchell cockatoo, to name a few. Sean, thank you so much for taking the time to come and chat with us today. I'm excited to learn more about you and the work that you do. Could you get us started today by telling us a little about Moonlit Sanctuary and what kind of work you all do there?
Of course. So thank you for having me. So Moonlit Sanctuary, again, it's a medium-sized wildlife park 40 minutes out of Melbourne, Australia. And we do focus a lot on education and conservation. We're heavily involved in breeding orange-bellied parrots and releasing them back into the wild, to name a few. With our Conservation in Action show, this is a wildlife show with many different Australian native creatures. The show has been running since 2016 after the need to hand raise a barking owl chick and a spot-tailed quoll joey. This gave us the opportunity and the idea to start a wildlife show. We started with only a small handful of individuals and we slowly built up to have over 11 different species of birds and mammals feature in the show at one point or another. When we first started the show, we started with two presenters, two trainers, myself and Fiona Rose, and we both had very limited training experience. I had taught my dog how to sit and I thought that was really cool. So we had a lot to learn at the time. Our first year or so, we had help from a behavioural consultant, training Fee and myself on how to train animals. She was giving us some feedback and advice. However, it's in the last few years, we've had the absolute pleasure of having Ryan Cartledge join our team. He's been coming and visiting the park twice a year for a week at a time, and it's been so much fun. It's been a really great experience. During the time of Ryan's visits, he will run presentations and workshops about positive reinforcement to help the presenters refine their training skills, but also pass on the knowledge to some of our other keepers who haven't had the opportunity to do any training. Ryan would also do lots of one-on-one sessions, helping everyone with their training goals. Last time Ryan visited the park, we all got to sit in a really big group and we all just played Portal for a while. So it was a really, really great time. With Ryan's help in person and all the help we get from the ATA forums, we've had staff train a number of different species throughout the park. Our koalas are crate trained to make it safer and easier to transport them into their encounter areas. We've had a kangaroo that's been trained to participate in a pouch check, allowing us to monitor the growth and the health of the joey inside, even allowing us to take progress photos, which has been so cool and so interesting. We've got a range of cockatoos that will step onto a perch onto scales for a voluntary health check. We have a monitor lizard that's crate trained, so he can be moved out of the enclosure while his enclosure is being cleaned, just so he doesn't get in the way and cause some mischief. And we've also got a crocodile that's target trained, so we can move him to the opposite side of the tank, allowing us to clean the tank from the other side, so safer for us and for the crocodile. So it's not just the show presenters, the show trainers that have the opportunity to train, but all the keeping staff are now doing it for a range of different husbandry behaviours, really beneficial for our animals. We've also been really fortunate to have Nicholas Bishop visit the park on a number of occasions to help teach the staff about story evolution, which is the art of storytelling. Nick has helped us completely rewrite our show script, making it more fun and engaging for our visitors. Previously, we didn't have much of a show script. It was mostly just an overwhelmingly amount of information, overwhelmingly animal facts just thrown at the audience. But now we can show the story of each species while they perform their natural behaviours that's unique to them. And then we link all of that together so we have a clear purpose for the show. And our clear purpose is we strive to inspire meaningful connection with nature, creating a world where all life can thrive. Over the years, we've gained much more animal cast and more show presenters. I'd like to add that it's very much a team effort in training a lot of these show animals. It's not just myself, but the show's supported by a bunch of really passionate, really talented and really dedicated bunch of animal professionals. So pre-COVID, we were not only running our conservation and action show daily, but also a training presentation where we train basic behaviours on stage while talking about positive reinforcement and how we train our animals to do these behaviours they're watching. And then we can relate that back to them training their own pets at home. So that's just a little bit about Moonlit.
That is great. Wow. What amazing work it sounds like you all are doing at Moonlit. And oh my gosh, there's so much that we could dig into based on what you just said. Very cool that you had trained your dog to sit when you started in your role at Moonlit. Is that what you said?
Yeah, I had just gotten a dog, I think a few months before I started training, and I taught him how to sit, and I thought that was way cool.
It is definitely way cool to teach a dog to sit, but it is also way cool to be able to move a crocodile around using targeting, right? So very, very neat evolution for you, I'm sure, in your training journey, working there and learning so much, it sounds like, from an original person that was kind of helping you all out to then having Ryan Cartledge come and help you out. And I'm sure anybody who's listening to this show knows that Ryan Cartledge is the founder of the Animal Training Academy, which sponsors this show and of which you are a member. So very envious of you that you get to work with Ryan in person on a regular basis and learn from him. So thank you for sharing all of that great information with us. And I know that we have some more questions to talk about where I'm really hopeful that some of your work at Moonlit is probably going to come out with some of these other questions as we move along. So wonderful, though. Thank you for sharing all of that with us so far. One of the first questions on the show, if you've had a chance to listen to it, Sean, one of the first questions that we like to ask people is a little bit about how their life outside of animal training influences their animal training and vice versa. So I'm not sure how long you've been at Moonlit. I'm not sure if you said that and I missed it a minute ago. So some people who I ask that question to say, people have lives outside of animal training, so I'm not sure if your life is totally immersed in animal training or if some things come to mind when I ask you that question. How does your life outside of animal training influence your animal training and vice versa? So
like everyone in the entire world, I'm constantly learning. I take away something new from every single animal I work with and train with at Moonlit. And after learning something new taught to me by one of my animals, I often think to myself, wow, how did I ever successfully train anything without knowing this? And then the next week, after learning something new, I'll think to myself, wow, how did I ever successfully train anything without knowing this bit of information? I take a lot what I learn from work and use this to train my own dog at home. But a learning experience from my personal life that I bring into my professional life doesn't really influence my animal training, but it influences the way I talk about positive reinforcement training to our visitors during our training presentations. This experience happened a few years ago at Melbourne's Dog Lovers Show. This is a really large dog convention that has all sorts of booths dedicated to all things dogs. It has lots of dog toys and clothing, food options. They even have guest appearances from Instagram famous dogs, which is a little bit funny. But the reason I try and go every year is to visit the breed clubs. There are so many booths set up for particular breeds, and I just love walking through that section and seeing all these amazing dogs that I've never heard of and talking to their owners and breeders. But when I go to the show, my partner and I, we always head to the Irish Wolfhound section straight away. In the past, we had a rescue dog that was a Wolfhound cross, and he was just the best boy. And I currently have a purebred Irish Wolfhound that I rehomed earlier this year who is sleeping by my feet, and he is equally the best boy ever. So while at the convention, I got into a conversation with a Wolfhound breeder. She was very experienced with the breed. She'd been breeding them for years. She'd been keeping them even longer. She was so kind to me. She was so generous with her time. She even offered me the chance, if I'm ever in the area, she said, call by. I've got 5 to 7 wolfhounds at a time. Come and chat and meet my wolfhounds. And she obviously very much loved her dogs very dearly. She was so tender and so gentle with them, and we're having a really great conversation. It's at the point where I mentioned animal training, she physically recoiled from me. Her eyes went really wide and she kind of leant back, and her attitude towards me completely shifted. Straight away, she started saying, no, they're sensitive creatures. You can't use any force with them. Even though they're so big, they're really sensitive. No, and just completely shut down the situation and the conversation. And I was really, really confused to begin with what had happened. But looking back, positive reinforcement is so ingrained in my learning history that when I think of training animals in general, I think of the choice that the animal has and the control that the animal has, and how enriching and how useful animal training can be. I hadn't even taken into consideration that her experience would be any different from mine. From what I could tell from her reaction, she thought I was talking about using punishments, using aversives and using force. And I was really shocked from her reaction that I couldn't really communicate at the time what exactly I meant by training animals. But if I could communicate effectively, I would really think we would have come to an understanding. It's just this experience outside of my professional life has definitely changed my view on our training presentations that we run at Moonlit. I see them for not just something fun and interesting the visitors can come and watch when they're visiting the park, but it's a great tool to teach the general public on how they can work alongside their pet and how any pets that they may have at home. It's also changed the way I talk about training during these presentations. I'm really careful not to assume that they know anything that I'm talking about. At Moonlit, we also run a range of animal encounters. For example, I do private encounters with a barn owl named Hootie. Now, while I'm doing these encounters, I now not only just talk about Hootie, about the individual and about the species, but now I'm really careful to explain how he's trained to fly to my glove when I enter the enclosure because of positive reinforcement, how he's trained to step onto a T-perch so he can do a voluntary health check. I'll show them his preferred reinforcement, which is chopped up mouse, which the kids really love to see. They find really gross. But I'm really careful to explain everything and how we get these behaviours. Even when we run private tours, I have started including information on how we train our animals and how we got the behaviour that they're witnessing at that time, and not just the basic information about the species and about that individual.
Thank you for sharing that, Sean. As you were talking, And actually, I'm not sure if it was when you were answering this question or the question before, but at one point, it could have been either one, but at one point you were talking about every week that you learn something new and you train something, you're like, how did I ever train without knowing this thing before? As you were sharing the story about your conversation with this woman, that kind of popped back into my head as well, because when you were saying that the first time, I was, really relating to that. How did I ever live without knowing this thing that I now know, But then I also, in my experience, it's like when I know something, I do just kind of tend to assume then that everybody else has that same knowledge that I have. And so your story kind of tied back to that thing that you were saying earlier as well. I thought when you realized that this woman did not have the knowledge that you have, and it's really cool to hear how that has now influenced your behavior in the shows, and I would think possibly, maybe even outside of animal training a bit as well. Is that accurate?
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly.
Well, wonderful. Thank you for sharing that with us and for talking about how it has influenced your behavior and your presentation and things like that in the show as well. As far as the shows, I also wanted to ask you something else that's popped up into my head a couple times as you've been talking is, have you had people ask you like any specific questions about how they could use training to help them with their animals or the animals in their lives after they've watched a show or seen you at the sanctuary?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a lot of young children ask. They'll often say, oh, I've got a budgie at home, and what can I teach my budgie after they've seen our free flight Major Mitchell cockatoo? Or we've had people ask, oh, I've got a guinea pig at home. What can I teach a guinea pig? So it's not just the dogs and the cats they're asking about like everything in between, which is just really cool. We've had questions about goldfish as well, and I've often said that personally I've never trained a goldfish, but there's some really awesome videos out there of people training goldfish to like target or just swim through hoops. So I always refer people to watch the videos, and I think that will probably definitely spark something in them.
That's amazing to be able to have that kind of influence on people's behavior. So that's wonderful to hear about that work that you're doing at the sanctuary. So thank you for sharing everything so far. It's always fun to hear about the different kind of backgrounds that members come to the show with, and kind of hear about some of that influence and overlap between our lives outside of training and how it impacts training and vice versa. But being that we're all animal trainers, it's also a lot of fun to hear about the kind of specific animal training projects that people are working on or have worked on. And so for our next question, I was hoping that you would share a bit with us today about a recent training-related challenge that you've experienced, and maybe kind of tell us how you worked through that challenge and some different things that you learned from it.
Yeah, well, thinking about this question, I thought may as well talk about the most recent challenging experience. Like a lot of the world and a lot of people that I know, we got lockdown puppies. Victoria had just started to ease restrictions after a 6-week lockdown, which meant we could reopen the park. And during this brief time, we got the opportunity to welcome 2 dingo puppies to the park, brother and sister Cole and Sooty, and they were bred by a demonstrating company. Myself and mammal coordinator Keandra Phillips, we were the ones to be charged in raising and training them together. A little background about dingoes: they're a small to medium-sized native wolf species. When put alongside dogs, they look really similar at first glance, but there's some real physical and behavioural differences. They are incredibly agile, very flexible, and they can also be really shy and really timid. Our plan with the pups, we plan to train them to do puppy encounters with the public, which would help generate some interest and attracting visitors after being closed during our lockdown. We also planned to train them to do our conservation in action show. We currently had 2 5-year-old female dingoes, sisters Amber and Cinder, that were performing in the show. And we wanted to retire Cinder from the show because she could become quite triggered, quite stressed, quite anxious in some circumstances while on stage. These triggers would be a range of different things. The show area is located right next to a dirt road, which is a public road, so anyone can drive up and down that road, but would have very large trucks drive up that dirt road, making lots of sound, rumbling, grumbling. They would drive past that road when they had to make a delivery to Moonlit, so that would be a really big trigger for her. If there was any change in the environment, such as if we installed a new perch for the cockatoos, that would be quite triggering. If something was removed from the environment, like a perch being removed, that would be quite triggering. If a visitor put a pram in the wrong section instead of the pram section, that could be quite triggering. A toddler would get up and run across stage. That could be quite frightening for her. A lot of her triggers were really hard to predict, especially with trucks driving past at really inconvenient times. Always at 2:30, show times at 2:30. 2:30, that's when the trucks would like to drive past. Her anxious or nervous behaviours would look like she would go into a crouching position, she'd do really jerky movements, her tail would be tucked and her ears would be back. While she was doing this behaviour, she's an amazing dingo, she would still follow every single cue I asked of her, but she'd be doing this while demonstrating this body language. On days where there were no triggering things in the environment, she was amazing on stage. She'd have her tail up, wagging. She'd have the tongue out of the side of her head, having a really great time. But these really great times on stage just wasn't worth Cinder being in that stress state for those certain days when those triggers were in the environment. So the kinds of behaviours we train our dingoes to do on stage, we have them move around the area. They're trained to jump up on logs and these really large rock stations. They'll do some basic behaviours on stage like sit, drop, roll. They'll post the photos. One of my favourite behaviours is for the dingo to do a look on cue. They are looking and focused on the trainer, but on cue they will kind of flick their head towards the audience, stare at them for 5 seconds for photo, and then flick back at the trainer. It's really, really cute, really funny to watch. But we're focusing on more natural looking behaviours. And we use the opportunity on stage to tell the story of the dingo and how they fit into our ecosystem. So the week we were to pick up the puppies, Victoria announced a second lockdown with tougher restrictions. Essential workers could only physically go into work. Masks were mandatory to wear. You could only travel 5 kilometres from your household, and there was a curfew as well. So the keeping staff had to go into 2 separate teams, and staff members had to work from home as well. Keandra and myself, we were in separate teams and we physically couldn't see each other while training these 7-week-old puppies. So you can imagine there was a lot of challenges that came across because of that. So some of the challenges was we could no longer train the puppies in front of each other. We couldn't give each other feedback. We couldn't problem solve in the moment, and we couldn't confirm that we were consistent in our training. We could no longer socialise the puppies as we had done in the past. When raising pups in the past, for the first 2 weeks, we have puppy sitting sessions where we would have keeping staff, admission and cafe staff, volunteers, family members that come in and play and socialise the pups for over 8 hours a day. And we really needed to expose the puppies to all types of people, but this wasn't possible at all. It wasn't safe to do so, and legally we couldn't do it anyway. So Sooty, our female, she started to demonstrate a bit of a fear of males, particularly our project manager. And as we only had a few male keepers, some of them had to work from home. It really felt like an uphill battle trying to socialise them as we needed to. We also had really limited time. We usually have volunteers that come to the park every week, and they're amazing and they really help us out cleaning enclosures and enriching and do all those things. But they physically couldn't come into work either. So we were in 2 teams. We had to look over 300 plus individual animals every single day. We didn't have enough time to puppy sit them for 8 hours a day, even with the staff available to us. Keandra and I were also at the time working through a massive challenge. We were introducing 2 dingo packs to become 1, something we hadn't done before. We were introducing Amber and Cinder, our show dingoes, into a very large enclosure with Blaze and Scorch, our encounter dingoes. And we're on a time frame as well because that Amber and Cinder enclosure was going to be the new puppies enclosure. So there was a lot going on at the time. There was also so many things we did about these challenges. Keandra and myself and Lisa Tuthill, who is our life sciences manager, we would have a weekly Zoom meeting. We would discuss how the puppies were going, thoughts, suggestions. We were describing their behaviours in detail, describing our cues for them in detail. During these meetings, we would discuss at length. We would organise our 5-week plans. These plans had our main goals, shaping plans, and we could refer back to these plans at any stage. We had made some very detailed SOPs for all the staff to follow in how they were to interact with the puppies and all the details in between. Keandra and I, we also messaged each other after every single shift on how the puppies were going, comments, feedback, questions, suggestions. After every single training session, we were doing about 3 to 4 a day. We would enter all this information into Zims, which is a information management system online, and we were very detailed in every single training session we did with them. We did have some limited puppy sit time. We had some staff members scheduled on to start an hour early for work, so they would puppy sit for an hour. Then throughout the day, we'd have a few puppy sitting sessions that were allocated to different staff members, and then we'd also have a staff member stay late till about 8 p.m. at night. So we're not able to get the 8 hours a day we usually would, but some time was still dedicated to puppy sitting the puppies. We also introduced a scary item of the week, which we posted on a whiteboard in a common area to help expose the puppies to all different things. We definitely looked at Cinder and looked at her triggers so we could introduce those things to the pups, as well as everything that they may ever come in contact with. So we introduced them to wheelchairs, crutches, hats, and we introduced them to smells like insect repellent, sunscreen. I even wore men's cologne for a week to see what that reaction would be. We introduced them to all sorts of noises like lawnmowers, and at one point I sat in my car tooting the horn and having another staff member kind of recording their reactions. After each puppy sitting session, the staff member would then record in great detail the scary object, what their behaviour, what their reaction was, and Keandra and I could monitor their progress that way. But one of the best things we did with the puppies was, because we physically couldn't take people into the park, we ended up taking the puppies to our own houses. So we had a bunch of keepers that volunteered their time to take the puppies home, where they could then socialise them with their partners, their fathers, brothers, housemates, and introduce them to all sorts of environments. And this worked an absolute treat. Staff members would send in very detailed descriptions of what happened when they first entered the house, when they first met the household, and all the behaviours in between. This was really excellent. So now we have finally reopened the park again. Our second lockdown was for almost 4 months. The pups are doing incredibly well with their show training. It was only yesterday where we did our first training session on stage with the public, and they did so well. Keandra and I were jumping up and down for joy for the next hour. We were so proud, so impressed with them. They're also doing really well with their encounters with the public. Sooty has not shown any negative reactions to strangers whatsoever. We have also made up a lure for her, so it's pretty much a pole with a rope. And at the end of that pole, we can attach a piece of fur or a piece of feather to it at the end. And if she decides she doesn't want to interact with the visitors, if she doesn't want to get close, she can still engage with them through the play of the lure, which she absolutely loves. So what have I learned? I wasn't too keen at the beginning of getting puppies. Keandra and myself, we complement each other really well. She was very excited, over the moon, and I was very, very reserved on the idea of getting puppies. All I could think of was training the previous show dingoes 5 years prior and how we were constantly running into challenges. Although I will mention at that time we were training the first show dingoes, we were very inexperienced at the time. But then when the announcement of the second lockdown happened, it seemed like getting these puppies to a high standard would be almost impossible. The experience of meticulously planning out the puppies' training sessions and including every single detail, that we weren't really leaving anything up to chance. This has taught me how incredibly valuable that is. And I don't think the puppies would have had all the success they have had now if we hadn't planned out everything so precisely. I had done training plans with some other species that I work with, but nowhere near the detail that we use for the puppies. Also, having the written SOPs for all the staff to follow on how to interact with them, their exact routines for the morning, exact routines for the night. This has really helped keeping everything really consistent. Also, by careful planning, we have managed to avoid every single issue that we had with our previous show dingoes with these puppies, something that I'm really grateful for. And in the future, I will definitely be valuing the planning stage more than I ever have in the past.
What an amazing experience that sounds like. How old are the puppies now?
They are exactly 5 months and 2 weeks.
And how old were they when you got them?
They were 7 weeks old.
Awesome. It sounds like you guys have done just amazing with them and come up with some really creative ideas for ways to work around the lockdown. I love that people were able to take the puppies home with them. Did you get to take the puppies home with you?
I did. I got to take them home. Being puppies, they're very, they like to destroy things, and my house isn't built for puppies. So that was a learning experience for me. For whenever I do get a puppy, I'm definitely going to be changing things in my house.
I have a lockdown puppy as well, not a dingo, but a lockdown puppy. So I can relate a little bit to puppies liking to destroy things. As people were taking the puppies home with them, you talked a lot about planning and a lot about data collection. It made me curious, was video a part of that? Were people able to kind of record some of the interactions with the puppies at their homes, or you and is it Kiana? Did I have the other trainer's name right?
Kiandra.
I'm sorry. You and Kiandra, were you able to share video with each other of some of the things that you were working on with the puppies? And if so, was that helpful for you?
Yeah, it was definitely ideal at the start. And I did film quite a few training sessions just so I could mostly look back on myself and just to see how they're improving. We did share some videos, but we found it wasn't entirely necessary because our communication was so great. But also to film the sessions, we needed a second person, and that second person was taking away time from all the other work that we had to do at the time.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. SOP, maybe I should know what that is, but I do not. What is an SOP?
So the SOP is a standard operating procedure. So it's like a very detailed form that we have, and it has every single step of what to do. So it's not missing any bit of information out. And when we're writing the SOPs, we need to assume that nobody knows anything about what they're doing. So everything's clearly labeled, clearly detailed on exactly what to do.
There we go, back to the theme of your story from the earlier question, too, about never assuming that people know something, right? Making sure to not take that for granted and to include the information in the SOP. So, yeah, okay, thank you. Do you have a favorite experience from your time so far working with these puppies?
There are so many. Probably something I'm really happy with at the moment. I've been working on an emergency recall with them, and that's in the form of a whistle. So the stage area that we train them in, it's quite a large area, and they are completely off leash, no harnesses, no nothing. And we also have this really big garden area. And when I say garden, it's mostly natural ferns, natural bracken, and it has some trees in it, but it's really, really thick ferns and lots of kind of woodland sort of area. And in that area, we have lots of wild rabbits in there that we do try to remove. But due to the area, it's almost impossible. And dingoes, being a wolf, they will hunt and chase anything. And with the previous dingo puppies that we had 5 years ago, one of the challenges we had was they would constantly run off stage, run into this fern area and hunt rabbits. And you can imagine what's more reinforcing to a dingo than hunting rabbits. So that was one of the huge challenges we had the first time. And so the second time raising these puppies, before letting them off leash in that area, I was training that emergency recall. So if there's ever an issue, that recall, hopefully, fingers crossed, will work. But only the other day, I had a keeper go in the enclosure with them, get them all really excited, feeding them kibble at the back of the enclosure. All I needed to do was blow that recall whistle, and they immediately left that keeper that they were having fun with, that they were playing with, they were eating kibble. They immediately ran away from him, and they both recalled to me straight away. So that's something that's probably one of my favourite events that's happened with the puppies so far. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more in the future, but that's really promising. And that gives me a lot of confidence that if something does happen on stage, if a rabbit runs past or if a bird flies in their view, if they're going to want to chase it, hopefully that's going to help.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I can imagine how wonderful that must feel to you. I can see it on your face, which other people can't see, but see it on your face and hear it in your voice, how wonderful that must feel to have the dingoes responding so well, these little puppies responding so well to that whistle recall. And it's interesting to me listening to you too. It sounds like your experience with raising these dingo puppies has been very different than your previous experience raising dingo puppies, and that probably maybe some of that difference is because of how much you learned the first go round. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I have no idea how we were so successful in training those first two puppies. When I look back at it, we didn't really know what we were doing at all. So I always thought it was just a miracle that it happened, that they were successful in the end. But yeah, definitely I looked at everything previously that had happened with the first two dingoes, and we all brought all that information to these dingoes to try and kind of stop any of that.
Love it. And I cannot wait to hear more about these dingoes as they mature and grow into adults moving forward. For the last question today, I was hoping you could share about another training experience, maybe. And it sounds like if I were you, I would be very proud of having trained both rounds of those dingo puppies, the first ones, and then learning everything that you did and using that information to shape the way that you trained the next round of puppies. But is there another training situation or behavior that you've trained that you could share about, something that you're proud of that you have trained?
Yeah, the story I'd like to share with you is the one of Sammy, the squirrel glider. A squirrel glider is a gliding possum. They have a gliding membrane from their front paws to their back paws on either side. So when they stretch out, they look a little bit like a kite, and this will allow them to glide in the wild from tree to tree. They've been observed in the wild. If they're in a really tall tree on an incline, they've been observed to be gliding 50 to 100 metres. So pretty amazing. They look quite similar to a sugar glider, but they're slightly larger. So maybe an animal you may be a little bit more familiar with. Sammy had a bit of a rough start to life. He was found on the bottom of our glider enclosure at a very young age. His mum actually passed away. Sammy was only 17 grams. He was furless and his eyes were still closed, so he needed a lot of time. He was reared by Lisa Tuthill, who's our life sciences manager, and she put a lot of time, a lot of love and a lot of dedication into Sammy to make sure that he did survive. And now he's a nice big grown-up adult squirrel glider. Lisa, being our life sciences manager, she's a very busy woman. She was training Sammy at the start and he was being used in the shows, but this was very early on in his training. And she decided she just didn't have enough time to dedicate to Sammy the time that he really needed. So she did pass his training on to myself. So the procedure to use Sammy in the show was I would enter Sammy's enclosure and I would call him out of his nest box, which he would be sleeping in during the day. He would come out of his nest box and he would sit on my hand. I would then walk Sammy on the hand outside of his enclosure, and I'd walk along a fence line past all these other enclosures with lots of other show animals in them. And then I'd walk on stage, and I'd be doing this while feeding him nectar the entire time. When on stage, I would lure Sammy onto a tree and I'd lure him with some nectar. I would then take a step away from the perch about a metre or so. I'd lean forward and Sammy would glide onto my shoulder. I would then have to lure him down from my shoulder onto my hand for some more nectar. I would then walk him around front of stage, so quite close to people so people could see him. I'd be feeding him nectar the entire time. And then when off stage, I would walk him along the fence line, back past all those other enclosures back into his enclosure. Now, while doing this, there were a number of things that didn't work for Sammy, and it didn't really work for myself very much. One of them was that once Sammy was on my hand in his enclosure, I needed to immediately walk on stage. It wasn't possible to stand back of house waiting for my cue, as there were so many different animals in view, and many of those animals were predators like barking owls and spot-tailed quolls. And for those animals, it was their showtime too. It was 2:30. It was their time to be active, to move around the enclosure and be ready for their turn in the spotlight. So I really had to plan my timing perfectly, listening out for the introduction over the speakers to know when exactly to get Sammy out ready for the show. And a lot of the time, if he wasn't ready at that exact moment, we were late entering stage. So just not a great look. When walking Sammy past the fence line and enclosures, there was a big risk of him being frightened by the other animals or any other things in the environment. And if he did get frightened, he would run up my arm onto my shoulder where I didn't have much control. If he wanted to, he could have easily jumped off my shoulder and run up a tree, or we could have easily lost him because he is very, very quick when he wants to be. While on stage, Sammy was often frightened by noises, particularly the sound of gravel or stones being moved under visitors' feet. The substrate in the seating area is like a fine gravel or stone mixture, and any movement makes quite a loud sound. Children really like to play in it and make little pyramids with the stones, and they love to shuffle their feet. So when Sammy was frightened, he would again run up my arm onto my shoulder where I didn't have much control of the situation. Something else that didn't work very well was luring Sammy onto a perch. I would use a bright blue plastic bottle cap, and I would use this bottle cap to put nectar in, and he would lick the nectar out of that little bottle cap. This was really cumbersome. It was really awkward. The bright blue cap would have been really distracting for the audience. It was really out of place. And it was also a lot to hold. I had Sammy in my left hand, and I had a bottle cap in my right, and I had a syringe full of nectar, which is his reinforcer, in my hand. So it was just a lot to hold. I would often fumble with the bottle cap or the syringe, or drop something. I'd have to pick it up and retrieve it while doing a show and try not to interrupt Sammy. And that was a really big challenge. So there was a number of really simple, really easy things that I could do to set Sammy up for success. These are in no order, but they are really basic, simple things, and it's made Sammy into an absolute show star. He's an absolute show professional. So one of them was crate training. This really alleviated the issue of being late on stage, as he will comfortably crate for a few minutes. So I could easily crate train him, have him ready back of house, and we can get him out for the show really quickly and on time. But this also helps him feel really safe and secure, and he can no longer see any of the potential predators in the area. I did lots of counter conditioning with Sammy with all sorts of noises. I started in his enclosure by gently moving the substrate with my feet. I've then slowly increased the volume, and I'd introduce all sorts of noises, like I'd start shaking branches, I'd start jingling my keys, and I'd do this in his enclosure while using a really high frequency of reinforcement. I then completely removed the blue bottle cap. I threw that out. Instead, I would just sanitize and clean my hands before the session, and I would deliver the nectar straight onto my hand where he'd lap it up. This removed one thing that I had to hold in my hands, and it was a lot less distracting for the audience as well. One of the best things I did with Sammy was target training. This allowed me to target Sammy onto a perch, giving him the choice and giving him the control whether or not he wanted to go onto that perch and whether or not he was ready to do a glide. The target is really easy. It's simply my index finger on my right hand tapping a perch. So I don't really need to hold anything else other than Sammy and his syringe of nectar, and that works really, really well. The last thing that I changed is how Sammy exits stage. Instead of walking him off sitting on my hand, I crate him before show, and then I hang up his nest box from his enclosure on stage just before the show starts. And he now exits stage by going through the hollow into his box. By having his nest box on stage, I can use this if something happens in the environment Sammy isn't comfortable with. If he gets frightened, I can easily just immediately walk over to his nest box that smells like him. He's very familiar with it, and he feels really safe in there, and he can leave that situation immediately. It's really Also, it's really great for storytelling, as a message that we spread throughout the show is the importance of nesting sites like hollows of eucalyptus trees, and this just adds a visual reference for our visitors. I give Sammy choice and control every step of the way. If he decides that he doesn't want to go in the crate that particular day, that's fine. I'll just skip Sammy's section for the show that day. If he decides he doesn't want to target onto a perch, that's fine too. I'll just station him on my hand for the show. He doesn't have to glide if he doesn't want to do. By giving Sammy control and really listening to what he's telling me, it's very rare that he ever decides that he doesn't want to do something. 9 times or 9.5 times out of 10, he always wants to do the show. He always wants to crate, and he also wants to target. And for whatever reason, if he doesn't want to crate at the beginning, it's usually because it's way too hot, if it's really windy, or if there's a delivery at that moment. His enclosure is fairly close to the delivering area where all the trucks turn up. But if it's not hot, if it's not windy, if there's no trucks, he always wants to come out for the show. Something interesting that did resolve after changing the way I trained Sammy, and I'm very thankful for it, and in the earlier days of working with him, he would do a very undesirable behaviour, mostly in the middle of a session. This undesirable behaviour was for him to climb up onto my shoulder, urinate all over me, and then he'd climb back down onto my hand, just ready to resume the session. This behaviour was not reinforcing for myself whatsoever, and my co-workers would often joke that I can't sit with them at lunchtime because I would smell so bad. This behaviour occurred almost every single session we did together, and I really regret not recording this particular information in my training notes, because after about a year, 18 months of being urinated on daily, I noticed one day that he just hadn't done it for a while, and I'm not sure why. I've never really unpacked this information, this behaviour, but Sammy and I are wee-free for over a year. Very interesting. I'm very thankful for it. But the training situation I'm proud of is how confident Sammy has become in the show area. He performs in front of a really large audience, and how Sammy and I work together to get the timing of the glide perfected. It's written into the script at what point in time Sammy glides, and it's just so beautiful to watch when he hits his mark. There is a line in the script just before he does a glide, so the audience doesn't really know what to expect. The line is, "You could say that Sammy is into extreme sports such as skydiving," and then boom, Sammy will do a glide at that perfect time, and it's magic.
How long have you and Sammy worked together so far?
Oh, we've worked about 3.5 to 4 years together now.
And when did you start implementing some of these changes that you've been talking about with me just now?
It was a bit of a learning experience. I continued on with the original procedure for a few months, and I was like, why am I doing this? It's not working for me. It's not working for him. And I just started with target training, and that was just a huge improvement for him and for the way we did the show. And then the crate training was brilliant, and then just kind of everything worked out really, really well in the end.
It certainly sounds like it did work out really well in the end, and the crate training does seem brilliant. I would agree with you on that, and I like how you're able to incorporate into the show about how the natural habitat of the animal as well, and how the crate that you're using, I believe you said, kind of simulates a nesting type behavior for Sammy. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So I'm also curious if you're able to work into the show a little bit. You talked a lot about choice and control, and how you were able to give Sammy a lot of choice and control with if he wants to check out of the show, he can go into his crate, which is great because it is similar to a habitat that he might be familiar with in the, that a squirrel like he might be familiar with in the wild, but also he has that choice to go into his crate, and you referenced, I think, choice and control a couple other times as you were talking. So I'm just kind of curious in the show if you're able to get those concepts across at all to the audience. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So during our training presentations, that's when we mostly focus on talking about the training of the animals, and the show we focus more on their place in the ecosystem and how we can help. But it's just times where Sammy decides he doesn't want to glide or if he doesn't want to target onto the perch, we'll go, all right, Sammy's decided he's not into that today. I'm just going to walk him around on my hand. So it's mostly if he decides in the moment he doesn't want to do it, we'll just be like, all right, Sammy's decided he doesn't want to do it. He's my boss. I work for him. He doesn't work for me. Let's just walk him around on the hand.
Okay, great. So it does sound like you're able to do it to kind of get that point across in a subtle type of way. So yeah, wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. I'm sure you're thrilled that Sammy is not urinating on your shoulder anymore, but like nothing like stating the obvious with that, right?
Yeah. There was a time where I was like, okay, it's time to train Sammy. I feel like I want to find something else to do instead.
It would have been really wonderful if you had kept that data, that very interesting to hear you say that, you wish you had been like tracking things a little bit more at that time to see just what was going on. When did the urinating on your shoulder stop? But thank goodness it did. I'm sure everybody is glad about that. Sammy included, I'm sure. So, Sean, thank you so much for taking time to sit down and chat this evening about the wonderful work that you're doing at Moonlit Sanctuary. It's been a lot of fun for me to get to know you a little bit better and get to learn a little bit more about that work. If somebody wanted to talk with you more about the work that you're doing, how could they contact you? If they wanted to find out more about Moonlit Sanctuary, where could they find information on that?
Yeah, so if you wanted to contact me, my email address is show, SHOW, @moonlit-sanctuary.com. And if you wanted to find more about Moonlit Sanctuary, you could find us on our Facebook page or also our website, which is www.moonlit-sanctuary.com.
All right. Thank you. And we will, of course, link to all of that in the show notes as well. So if anybody wants to get in touch with you, and for all those who want to find out more about Moonlit Sanctuary, they will have the information that they need to do that. So, Sean, from myself and behalf of everybody listening today, I just want to say thank you again. We really appreciate you taking the time to come and chat with us today. It's been a lot of fun and interesting. It's been very interesting and a lot of fun for me listening to the wonderful things that you have to share. So thank you for coming and talking to us today. We do, of course, appreciate all of you tuning in as well. And if you have enjoyed this episode and are interested in carrying on the conversation about working with the animals in our lives in the most positive, most fun, and most choice-rich ways, then as mentioned at the start of this episode, the Animal Training Academy community is waiting for you. Head on over to www.atamember.com and click on the membership button in the main menu to learn more about what members are describing as the Netflix social media platform for behavior geeks. That's it for this episode, though. Thank you so much for listening. You'll hear from us again soon.